Jason, welcome to the Interrupted Podcast, brother. I so appreciate you taking the time this evening to just dive into life a little bit and hopefully give our audiences something to chew on.
Dive into life a little bit. Oh my gosh, where are we going with this one, man? I'm because
Hey,
I'm like I'm 98 days away from being 50, and I'm like, man,
whew,
that's a lot of life, I guess.
I'll tell you what. Well, hey, past, present, future. Hopefully, we'll get to a little bit of it all. And at the end of the day, really, it's about helping folks connect with stories, right? Just at a human level. All of our paths, it's great to be able to draw out the similarities as we experience life in different ways. And I think no matter what vocation, what area you come from, there's something just really central with the human experience that I love to hear from folks and have those connection points, right? So we can then move on to hopefully something greater for ourselves.
Now you bring up a great point. You don't have to be in any type of background to have life experiences. You don't have to be a veteran. You don't have to be a law enforcement, emergency responder, or anything. You just have to live. And we all
Sure.
have these, we all have experiences. And a lot of times, they're connected. We all have some sort of similarity. And that's what's crazy about it.
Yeah. No, even just connecting here for a second right before we got rolling and just hearing how, we over the course of time we spent not our some of our careers hit the same areas for sure. So that's always cool to find out. And you're turning 50. I turn 40 here in a couple days. So we got about a decade apart from us. But it's from what I can tell, as far as social media is concerned, which is a whole nother bag. But man, you got your hand in so many things, and it looks like there's an element of life that you are just like driving hard after right now, and it comes out, and that vigorous pursuit, let's say that you're having in life right now, and as you're kind of putting that out there for the world to see, it's really motivating and it's inspiring. And I know I'm not going to be the first person to have picked up on it, but with everything you got going on, man, I know there's those connections. How is it, before we get into the details, just what seemingly like this whole podcasting, books, social media, and I know you've been doing a lot of this stuff for varied lengths of time, but what is it like putting yourself out there?
It is, wow, putting myself out there. It coming from the law enforcement background. So for the audience that doesn't know, I've been in law enforcement for 22 years now, 23 when I retire. And from the border patrol to being a special agent and working drugs and to working Al Qaeda as DOD and all sorts of other different things. And I'm still a Fed. But in that world, and you know this as well as I do, and a lot of people do, you don't really put yourself out there.
Mm,
And I didn't really start putting myself out there until about 4 years ago. But since then, I'm very comfortable doing it. I don't mind doing it because what I'm learning is that the more I put myself out there, the more maybe I could help someone.
mm.
Maybe they'll look through my experiences and be like, hey, you know what? I didn't look at it like that. And you mentioned turning 40. I didn't really get my stride, with education and with, writing or anything until I was in my 40s. So it's a little bit different. And yeah, I'm really out there, man. My life is like an open book. The only thing I don't talk about really is like I too have two great kids, 12 and 14. I don't put them on
Mm.
social media. And I went back and scrubbed my Instagram with them. I haven't put anything new on Facebook with them in a long time. And, I just don't talk about my family too much because, they didn't sign up to be the face of the Protectors podcast or Dr. Jason Piccolo or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's an interesting point as we think about. I mean, we're really in the infancy of what it looks like to expose yourself to the entire world, and it's exciting, and there are so many connection points, but there's a lot of unknown there too. That just trying to navigate that and what greater impact that's going to have on the next generation, we just don't know at this point. And right, we come from a
No.
consent world, and our kids definitely aren't have the ability to say yes or no to that picture that gets flown out there, right? And so I know it's a conversation that I constantly have and think about when people ask how the kids are doing, and maybe I'll post something to my private accounts for family and whatnot. But it's so interesting. I don't even know
Actually,
where to land
I'm
on it.
going back to texting pictures to my family and stuff. I'm like, hey, here, take a look at this.
Reverting.
Yeah. But you talk
Awesome.
about technology. I remember getting out of the army in the 1990s
Hmm.
and taking Windows 95. And I was so excited. I'm like, this thing, you can click it and you got a certificate. I think I still have those certificates somewhere. It's like your intro to Windows. And I'm like, yes, I'm now
Yeah.
ready to go take on the world.
You have arrived. No, that's a good point, man. And we continue to see it, right? That's what technology does to us, and
Yeah.
so we choose to have our level there. But man, you kind of said a little bit, but I'd really like to take a pause and really get into some of your background, because and you can maybe help clear this up for me as I look at the many things that you've done over the course and are still doing as you're still employed over your career. You've had your hand in a lot, and even just like searching some of the backgrounds and things that have come out about you in the past, it's like, man, how did the path arrive at the moment that it is now? And what were those contributing things that led to it? So can you just take a little bit and just go back to your childhood upbringing? And I'm thinking a lot about and love to hear where the catalyst came to enter a world of public service, whether that started with sports in high school, or whether it was a family member or a friend. Can you just walk us through
Sure.
growing up a little bit?
Yeah. I didn't have the most stellar upbringing. A lot of family traumas, a lot of family difficulties, with the parents and everything else like that. Ended up leaving home permanently when I was 16. I did leave expeditiously a couple times before that, but with family members going through some issues with suicide and other stuff like
Hmm.
that, suicidal ideations and attempts, I ended up the best thing for me to do was to move on and to move with a very stable family. My One of my best friends back then had a really good stable family. They invited me in, and I started thriving. But I always had this need, this want to be a soldier. And I always had this need or want to also be in law enforcement. Maybe because of what happened to me as a child, I wanted to, help other people. And that's why, like, to this day, I'm still in that mode. And that's why I do a ton. But back then, yeah, I got out of high school, went to community college, did not do fair well in community college, lost a girlfriend, broke up with me one day. My best friend died of cancer the next day. I failed out of community college and said, you know what? I need to really take a next step. So I joined the army, and that's what I did. I
Okay.
joined the army, and that really was the catalyst to kind of reprogram my brain.
Okay.
There was no more of the, hey, I'm going to feel sorry for myself. I'm going to, drink. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to reprogram myself and then move on. And that's why, like, I did my service. I got out, ended up continuing my service in the reserves, and then pursued a commission into the U.S. Army, and just started. I started with a bachelor's, got my bachelor's in 2.5 years, and said, hey, you know what? I need to do more. So I went into the U.S. Border Patrol, and then from there, it just kept going.
Yeah. What did education do for you? Like you have that what seems like almost a dichotomy where you're learning this very specific skill to go be a soldier, and then was it something specific in that time where you said, "Hey, that kind of thirst for and appreciation for what education can bring to the table"? What was that like as you're trying about? Were you resistant towards it, or were you finding that was helpful in what you were doing at that time?
I originally planned to go into law enforcement right out of the military,
Okay.
but the first location they wanted to send me with the Border Patrol was some really remote area of Texas. So I said, you know what? I have the GI Bill, I have the college fund. Let me use it. First, I was going to go take an EMT course,
Okay.
but then I was able to get into college on a almost like a quasi double secret probation. As long as, because I had bad grades before, as long as I could get good grades that first semester, they would put me on as a full-time student. And then I just started saying, hey, you know what? I can't get to where I need to get to in my life unless I continuously learn.
Mm.
Now, I'm a different kind of person when it comes to education, though, because right now I am a college professor on the side. I teach at St. Joe's University. I teach in community colleges here and there. I'm starting to teach at another university. I've got the master's, I've got the doctorate, but I don't look at education as any more important than like a trade.
Mm.
And as a matter of fact, I feel maybe that is another reason I want to do podcasting, because if I'm not building something or doing something that I could tangibly see or feel, I don't really feel like it's a critical skill. Now,
Okay.
like I said, I love education. I love when people learn. I've been very fortunate to have the military pay for my education. And that's the other reason I wanted to knock out my bachelor's quicker so I'd have more money later on. But I'm very, very big proponent of people having skill. And if that skill comes from getting an education, then do it. If that skill comes from learning how to break down a car engine and rebuilding it, then do it. If that has to working with your hands, woodworking, do it. Or maybe just industry. But it really did help me get to the next level when it came to law enforcement, because when I did become a special agent back then, you had to have a degree.
Okay. Well, I mean, what I'm hearing a lot there is all these transition points, right? And I think that's the point where folks really get hung up, though, is yeah, you're taking a risk to go try something new, and you're maybe looking at these markers in your career or in your life. Maybe it's a family situation, what have you, that you say, all right, I'm about to embark on this and take a risk, and I know. Leaving something behind to start something new, even though it can be very exciting, you're putting a lot on the table. And some people do this better than others. And so I'm fascinated, meeting somebody like yourself who you are walking through these different transitions. And not that it's easy, but what was it that said, okay, it's time to take this step from the military, and this was maybe always a pipe dream of mine to get into law enforcement and look at protecting in a different way. Um, how do you manage transition like that?
I'd love to say that I had this complex plan that I wrote out in like 5-page journals, entries, and
Sure.
Excel spreadsheets and maps and this and that. I remember when I was about to get out of the Army, my captain at the time, I was a special C4. And when I was getting out, he does his transition brief. He brings me into his office. He pulls out a calculator and he starts typing in like, digits. And I'm like, what the hell is this guy doing? And he's like, you know what? You're not going to be able to afford to get out of the Army. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I have the college fund and GI Bills. You can't live on it. I just did the figures. You're not going to be able to get out there and live on it. I'm like, you know what? I'm committed. And that's the thing, is I was committed. I didn't really have a plan. I didn't have
Mm.
a job set up. A lot of people don't realize that you can get unemployment when you get out of the Army. So I was like, hey, you know what? I'll go on unemployment for a few months until I get myself on my feet. But I didn't have a solid plan, but I knew that I had to take that step. I took the step to put the uniform on. I had to take the step to take the uniform off, even though, later on I put the uniform back on.
Yeah.
But I made the decision and I committed. When I became an officer in college, that is one of the biggest lessons I learned. And I wish they taught this to privates. I wish they said, hey, you know what? You need to make a decision and stick with it. It may not be the right decision, but you have to stick with it, and then you readjust it as you go.
Mm.
Because a lot of people will sit there and they'll hesitate and they'll hesitate and they'll hesitate. And when the time to strike, the time to move is now. It's not, there's no magic course out there, no magic anything out there that's going to make you more viable to do that, make that decision than there is right now.
Yeah, well said. Does how did discipline come for you? Was it something that was that the military had teacher? Do you feel as if even as a kid, just with some of the things you experienced, you had that drive to um, know what you needed to do and just execute day in and day out? Where did that really arise? Because I hear that being a big piece of this equation when you use the word commitment. It's like, okay, once you give mental assent to it and say, hey, I'm going to execute on this thing, then it takes the ability to just have the discipline as that, mountain and valley moments come.
Well, discipline and making decisions, there's always an objective. What is it? Whether it's going to be you're getting up in the morning, You're going to make your breakfast. You're going to make your bed. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. You're going to get out the door. That's 5, 6 different steps you've already made a decision to take. Or you could just lay in bed and not do anything. That's another decision, but it's not a good one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is having an objective. And you mentioned before about the transitions and stuff. I've transitioned a ton over the past 30 years. And I'm about to go into another transition next year if I choose to retire. I have to have options. My one objective is I know I'm going to be turning 50. Do I retire? One objective is retire, go on and get another job. I'm not going to be able to just retire. That's not a variable anymore. It's getting another job. So my objective is get another job. How am I going to do that? Well, for one, I mentioned that I teach college here and there. One of my jobs I could take is I could teach college. 2, I could take a contracting job and work for the government in another capacity. 3, I could try to do a full-time podcast or do this and that. 4, I could write another book. There's different options. There's different outs, but they all go towards the same objective. Or maybe I do a combination of all 4, something to support that objective, which is to get to the next level. That's the same thing I've always thought about with education. I wanted to get education so I could become smarter, so I could learn something new, a new skill or whatever that's going to take me to the next level. When I got to the next level, I'm like, okay, I want to get to the next level. Maybe someday I want to be a teacher. I want to be a professor. So then I get the doctorate. And I do it all on the side. So as you said before, I have a lot of different things going on right now. Just finished up another edition of my book, doing the podcast, working full time, raising kids, and shooting guns, and doing all this competing, and
Yeah.
doing this setting new health objectives as well. But it all comes down to just making decisions and having objectives, having a plan to get there. I am always planning. I'm always hustling.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think hustling is all about money, but to me, it's all about supporting myself to get to that next place. So then I can support everybody else as well.
Yeah, no, the position to that you find yourself in when you create options. Okay, now you need to make a lot of decisions, right? The more options you have, the more decisions are to be made. And you've probably heard this before. It really hit home with me a couple weeks ago when I heard a guy talking about it. That this idea that every decision you use discernment, arrive at a decision, make a decision. The decision is final, but it is not permanent, right? And so as long as you realize that I'm good with this decision based on what I know right here and now, but because I'm willing to adapt, that decision doesn't have to be permanent. Whether it was a good one or bad one, you can move through it onto the next one. And to be successful in those, I guess, next ventures that you're taking on, you got to do this well. And I don't know what the specific competencies are that cause that to arrive in a person. Do you use someone or use specific tactics when you're at decision points? Do you have mentors, or do you, your family? How do you really, when you're at this, like, okay, I'm at this crossroad here, and there's good things on the horizon, but how do you start to weigh that to that discernment equation?
Well, using family is cool, but I don't like to put my pressure onto them. But one
Sure.
thing I like to do is, like, when I'm working through things, I don't share my stress with my family. They're already going through their own stress. Kids, my daughter is about to be a teenager. My son is a teenager. And then it's like, they don't need my stress, but I do network a lot and I do bounce ideas off of people. But one thing I did do is, like, about 4 or 5 years ago, I learned the Lean Six Sigma technique. It's process improvement.
Okay.
That's the thing with me, is I always have to learn.
Yeah.
So I'm always doing process improvement with myself. How do I get from point A to point B to point C? Can I skip point B? Can I just go from A to C? And that comes down to, really looking at things. Okay, so I'm going to let's say, for instance, starting a podcast.
Sure.
I jumped right into it. I didn't think about it. But now all the lessons I've learned over the past 3 years is, okay, I would not do what I did back then. I would plan it out. I would have a certain minimal amount of equipment, and I would do this. Back then, I was just jumping into it. I wasn't planning out my interviews. I just figured, throw it all against the wall, something's going to stick. It's lessons learned. So much of this stuff is lessons learned. And that's one of the things I like about writing now is like I always tell people like write a journal because you're going to want to go back and reflect and you're going to want to know what did I do wrong back then? Because some of you made these decisions. Everybody makes decisions and a lot of them really suck. But
Sure.
what did you learn from them? And you're going to make those same type of decisions later on, but maybe you don't make them the same way. And that, like I mentioned, is stress in my family. There were some times where I was in really dark places over my career and my life, but I wouldn't use my family to help me. But I've also learned that now I can use my emotions. So I'm not saying, hey, completely shut off all your emotions, stress, but some things they don't need to know about. They don't need to know, like, man, I just lost an audio file. 2, this book really sucks. Or 3, what am I doing next? Or 4, am I going to be able to support my family? They don't really need to know the stressors. They need to know that you love them. They need to know sometimes you're not always in a positive mood, but you don't need to take it out on them.
Yeah. No, and oftentimes just in any service profession, without us verbally or putting that stress on our families, they feel it, and that's a lot of times very obvious. We try and guard them from those things, but just the very nature of what we choose to step into brings with it a weight that I think you would find that most people in the profession would say, yeah, part of why I love doing what I was doing because I want to be the person that chooses to stand in that gap and carry that weight. But it does have an effect, and we have to acknowledge that. But I really like your perspective there of what we choose intentionally to share and not to share with our family, and then how do we find those outlets? Is that what shooting is become for you, or is that just straight hobby and it doesn't?
No, you know what's weird? It's like it's the competition factor.
There you go. Okay.
It's I love, I played football in high school and stuff throughout the years. Back in the day, I used to run. Never really good at it. That's one of the reasons I ruck now. But shooting to me it's about competition. It's about getting myself to be the best I can. And then hey, maybe someday I'll get a trophy, or something. It's just something really cool that I could like learn. I've been doing it for 30, 40 years now. I've been shooting some sort of gun. But now I'm doing the competition shooting, and I'm like, this is so cool. I'm out there with civilians and people. One of my shooting partners, he's probably 55, 60 years old, works for Amazon, picked up his first gun about 3 years ago, and he's doing competition shooting.
Wow,
And
good
he's
for him.
learning.
Yeah.
He's learning right there with me. And it's the coolest thing to be shooting with, you know, outside of my normal sphere of people, shooting with people that just like to shoot. It's competition and it's fun. And my goal now is I always have these different objectives now, and I'll go into why I'm doing that now.
Sure.
But it's another objective for me. So next year, I plan on getting into some sort of, state championship or national championship. That's my goal. Place in the top 5 for my category in some sort of competition. And that it's part of the thing is having a goal, having these things that you could attain to. You don't have to be. I always hear that, oh man, when I was younger, I was in the best shape of my life. I got to get back to there. About 6 months ago, and I'll tell you the story in 1 minute. I just got to say this.
Yeah.
You don't always have to go back. I want to be 50 years old and be in the best shape of my life, or the best shape that I can be in my life for that period. I don't need to be like I was when I was 20, 30 or whatever, when I was in a really different shape. I don't want to go back. I hear the used to be's all the time. Listen, a lot of us used to be badass, but be a different type of badass and live for it now. Live in the moment and get there. But if you start thinking about the past and you start pushing your body like it was in the past, you're not going to get there. You have to readjust. And that's why I'll go into like what happened to me about in March of this year.
Yeah.
I was really overweight. The stress that I wasn't showing my family what built up, and my blood pressure spiked. And I remember picking my daughter up from elementary school at the time, and we go down and we get some ice cream. And I stand up, and all of a sudden I go flat on my face, passed out, completely passed out. I woke up, I had no idea where I was. Luckily, there was this Navy vet there. He came over. He's like, hey, you want me to call the ambulance? I'm like, call him. I'm like, because at the time, I'm like, I'm probably going to have a heart attack or whatever.
Mm.
And I'm just sitting there, I'm watching my daughter. And the only thing I can think of is she's seeing me at the absolute worst I've ever been in my life, overweight, making fun of my stomach, blah, blah, blah. And now she's in an ambulance with me. And we're going to the hospital. They do a CT scan. Heart's okay, but it's just my blood pressure went so through the roof that, I could have died. And that point right there, I wasn't drinking much anymore, maybe a few beers here and there, but I pretty much cut alcohol out. I could probably count about a handful of beers I've had since then. I don't really have the taste of it, but I started setting milestones.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of my buddies gave me a program. It's a 90-day intense. They call it Intense 90, and he put me on it. I lost about 45 pounds, but it kept me going and it kept me thinking, okay, I need to become the protagonist of my life. I need to be the hero of my own story. I can't keep trying to attain to be someone that I'm not. And in order for me to be the hero of my own story, I need to do things. I need to move. I ruck. I do these Orange Theory classes. I go to the gym. I do this. I do that. I write, mentally stimulating myself. And I keep finding different things to do. So next step's probably going to be, I have the Army 10 miler next week. I'm going to ruck the 10 miles. And then I'm going to doing a 100-mile bike ride for charity in January. Now, the next thing I'm doing, I just signed up today to do the Baton Death March at White Sands.
Did you really?
Yeah,
Wow.
don't even ask me. One of my friends is like, "Hey, you're gonna do it?" I'm like, "Probably not." Then I'm like,
That's like you just do it and you make the plan later.
"Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happened."
Oh my goodness.
So I do that, and then I keep doing the events, just like the shooting championships and this and that. So yeah, I have to have objectives.
Yeah. And how has your family responded to that as you are taking on this protagonist role and you're embracing it, right? That's what it really sounds like to me is you're saying, "Hey, this is definitely something you're going after and leaning in towards." And have you been able to see a change in your family as how
Oh,
they look at you?
absolutely.
How so?
Yeah.
What kind of tangible things have you noticed?
Well, before it was like I wouldn't even get off the couch.
Hmm.
I was just in a really dark place at the time. And I was always like, my back hurt, my body hurt, everything was hurting. But when I started moving, I was like, huh. And one thing is things changed quick.
Hmm.
I'm 49, so things changed a lot quicker than I thought they were. For Father's Day, I said to myself, okay, I'm not going to do the usual, going to get up in the morning and they're going to go get a big fat breakfast somewhere. I said, okay, I'm going to put a ruck on and I'm going to show my kids that it's a day, but I'm going to show them what you could do. So I put a 55-pound ruck on, walked out my front door, walked to the Lincoln Memorial. It's 13 miles. And I was like, look, I did it. And they're like, wow, what's up with that? And then I read a book called The 12-Hour Walk. And because I have a podcast, I was having the author on. So I'm like, the 12-hour walk sounds kind of interesting. What it is you walk for 12 hours straight. You can take breaks and stuff like that, but no social media, no phone, no audiobooks, no friends, no nothing. You just go and you think. No music. You just go and you walk 12 hours and you think. And I was able to go out there and walk and process and do a lot of different things. It's these different events that are keeping me moving forward. And it keeps me going, gives me the objectives. And then I'm hoping what happens is it transforms over to my kids. My son's really into football now. My daughter's really into soccer. They're doing things that they're really pushing themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that some of it's like, hey, you know what? Dad's not sitting his lazy ass on a couch, drinking beer or whatever,
Sure.
that you could do it at any age. And I'm hoping that it just keeps going for them.
Yeah, and I mean, as a father, there's not too much greater than knowing that hesitate to even use the word, but influencing your family in a good way, because at the end of the day, that's the most. We are all influencers, and those are the people that should be on our mind, and we should be considering what they're seeing each and every day. And I fall in that same category with you in that I know that they are watching, and I know that there are others watching that am not aware of, and for them to be taking a moment out of their day to be like, Why is this guy doing what he's doing? Is that the right path? Should I get on that path? Should I run from that path that they're walking? That in and of itself weighs really heavy as you go into this performance lifestyle, not in the performing for the multitudes, but just because you need to be around and living the best life that you can be. That human optimization that we see, and I mean that's really rising to the forefront of what we're seeing in culture right now, and I think that's a good thing in culture. We can be dismissive of all the bad that is happening, but there is this drive to optimization. And I mean, how have you kind of taken? Do you see that shift, or do you see it differently than that?
I see it. I see it like, and that is you mentioned influence. I hate influencers. I hate the vet bros out there. I hate these people that are doing it to grift and to make money.
Sure.
But to influence your kids with your actions, you know, getting out there, training, doing all this, doing all that is so much more influence on them than anything I've ever done. They used to watch me when I get up in the morning. I used to go do the news all the time, or I'd be on court TV or something. And they'd be like, oh, whatever. But now that I'm out there like doing things, they're like, oh, wow, when are you going to be back? And I'm like, a couple hours. They're like, really? You're going to go work out for 2 hours by rucking somewhere and biking? But I want them to see it. I want them to see me. I want them to go with me and drop me off at the Army 10 miler next week.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to be like a machine. And that's what I keep trying to tell people. I'm like, look, my philosophy is this. It doesn't have to be pretty and it doesn't have to be perfect, but you have to move. And then you also have to watch the fuel going in your body.
Yeah.
Listen, the past couple of weeks, I've had pizza. I've had this, I've had that. I didn't work out as many times as I wanted to, but hey, I have another objective. I jump on it. I'm back on track. The old me would have worked out for a month and he would have said, I'm not getting anywhere. And I would have just been like, okay, I'm going to go and get a calzone or, drink some beer or whatever. The new me is like, okay, well, hey, you had some pizza. Now, next day you better, think of fuel. Think of food as fuel. Think about your objective as not being the absolute pinnacle of, you don't have to have ripped abs and be like Mr. Liver or whatever they call him.
Yeah.
Or all these other
Liver
people.
King.
Yeah. You don't have to be. You just have to be the best that you can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if the best you can be doesn't have to be the absolute best that your body can be.
No. Well, and that's why I like what you said about having the objective, right? If we seek comparison versus seeking the objective, we're going to have a much better outcome, I think, right? The comparison can exist as a motivator, but it can't be what the trophy is, right? To ultimately be better than that person. It needs to be a marker to say, oh, where I'm at, I need to be better, and how do I get there? Whether you have to get resources, get education, listen to a new podcast, read a new book, whatever that might be, have a serious conversation with your doctor. I mean, it's so many things, and that interruption, right, in life is to say, no, I'm ready for this. I need to do something differently, and I didn't necessarily intend this to go down the parenting pathway here, but man, it's so vital to use that as a motivator, because look, we're here for a finite amount of time, and
legacy. When your legacy's done, when you have kids, it's now their legacy. What are you going to do to make them be a better person? Are they going to be a better person seeing me being the worst person? Are they going to be a better person or seeing me being the best? If I dropped it, and that's the thing, is coming close to dropping dead and knowing that if I died right then, they would have seen me in my absolute worst. Let's say now I'm doing all this stuff, and for a freak accident or something happens tomorrow, at least they'll see me when I was at or getting to my best. And you mentioned the thing about chasing a trophy, and it actually just clicked on my head right now. Listen, I'm never going to be winning a marathon. I'm going to ruck. I could do all these million events in the world. But the competition shooting brought me back to a certain point where I'm like, if I just practice and practice and practice, might be able to be the best in my class or close to it. I'm not going to be the best in the world, but maybe I'll be the best in, Fairfax County, Virginia, or wherever, the state of Virginia, and then move up to
Yeah.
whatever. Or maybe I'll do best out of 5. When it doesn't matter, but I have the competition thing is there.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Now, what's your thoughts on the balance here, specifically with family, of when you get into a moment in time where you are like, I'm making gains, I'm running hard after the next thing that's going to help me leave that legacy, and it's going to get me in a health situation that I know is beneficial for me and the people I'm trying to lead. How do you kind of work through well, if I do all this stuff, it also takes away from being present with those that need to see what you're doing. Do
Believe
you
it or
think
not,
about
I'm
that a lot?
the greatest thing is I get to drop my kids off at school. I get to pick them up at night. My daughter just popped her head in here. I'll go after this. We'll go hang out. I take breaks. I'm not always doing something.
Mm,
But then the thing is too, like writing. I love writing, or I love teaching. A lot of my teaching's online. There's a lot of things I can just put my laptop in my thing for watching a show with my kids or whatever. I could be doing something multitasking, but their time is always comes first, and I always have to I try to incorporate things with them, riding the bike, doing this, doing that. But they are the absolute priority. And I probably should bring that up more when I do social media and everything, that I'm not doing that. But I'm like, hey, you know what? I don't need to justify it, because I know that I'm giving them so much more with this life that I have now than I was before.
yeah. And they need to see that, maybe more importantly, or definitely more important than the public needs to see that, right? Hopefully the things that you're putting out there are impacting people for the good, but at the end of the day, it's that would be a huge compliment to say, wow, like my daddy accomplished these things. However, I know he was there for every moment he needed to be there and could have been there. And that in and of itself is a huge victory, and something to strive after. If you could, maybe transitioning a little bit here and talk a little bit about what did early leadership look like for you as you were having successful careers and making gains? And I know there was, I'm sure, disappointment along the way in there. But what was it like coming from the background you did and the things you were accomplishing when you started to have people, maybe prior to this family of yours, and experiencing leadership? What was that journey like?
Well, in the beginning, going to college, coming out of the army, this was pre 9/11, and we were coming from a Cold War. I thought I knew a lot more than I did. I'm still in my 20s. I get to college, I get to ROTC, and I remember one of the peer evaluations, the guy said, guy or girl, I don't even know who wrote it because it was anonymous, said, Piccolo thinks it's his way or the highway. I'm like, huh. And that stuck with me since then. I'm like,
Mm,
you know what? Leadership to me is a team. You don't have to have a title. Titles help you get to certain points and help you do things, but you don't need to have a title. You have to work as a team. And if your team isn't going to be able to help you out, then you have to adjust your team. You have to adjust to step up. And there's other people that will step up, but you have to have a solid team. And you could have, anybody in law enforcement can tell you, you could have a squad, or in military or whatever, you could have a squad of 10 people. 5 people are really good support. 2 people, they're not doing shit. 3 people, really, really good helpers, and 1 really good leader. And then, you have the one guy who's in charge, one guy or girl. But sometimes the teams just don't work, but everybody has their strength. Those 2 people out there who are really bad, and everybody, don't try to add the numbers up because I'm not good at math. But the 2 people that are horrible and you think they're horrible, you're going to continue to treat them horrible, and they're going to not want to help you. Find out whatever their strength is, whatever it is, no matter how small that strength is or how minuscule, bring it out and let them participate in the team. If not, you're just going to have 2 dead weights.
mm,
The 3 people who are supporters, they really want to support. Maybe they just don't know how to do anything else. Maybe you help them get to the next point. Maybe they could step up into a leadership role. There's always a piece of the puzzle where someone could fit into it. You just have to make sure it works. Those 2 people you ignore, they start festering, they start getting mad, And then you see the negativity starts bleeding into the rest of the team. I came up with a philosophy a few years ago. I don't even know if it's original, but hey, I liked it. I would come into work, and my one coworker every morning would always start off with something negative, always. And I was like, man, I don't even want to see this guy, but I have to go by his desk. So I go to him like, hey, brother, why don't we do this? Why don't we do 90-10? He goes, what are you talking about? I'm like, 90% of your day, you could only say positive things, no matter what the situation is. I mean, obviously, if there's a hurricane or something going on crazy, you're going to be negative. But normal day, nothing crazy going on in life, 90%. And you only have 10% to be negative. Only once that's over with, you have to be positive.
Hmm.
If you use that 10% early in the morning, the rest of your day, you're going to have to be positive. Are you going to use it up? Or are you just going to save it up to whenever you really need to be negative? We tried that for a couple of weeks. He's like, you know what? I started doing this at home too. He's like, I don't see myself even using it 10% anymore. He's like, there's so much out of your hands. Listen, if you've worked for the government, corporate, or anywhere, you're always going to have managers and bad bosses. The bad bosses, you're always going to have someone that you don't see eye to eye with, whether they want to have 17 Zoom meetings a day just to hear themselves talk or whatever. After a while, you just step back and you say, you know what? That's out of my control. I can make myself pissed off, or you could drive forward, be positive, and two, those other objectives going on, find the other job, find the out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that because exactly where you went with it is what I thought. It's like, man, if once you start being positive, it just compounds on each other. And then even the things that are negative, right, you're able to frame them a lot better. And as soon as you can frame the negative and adapt from that, we can really hit our stride. I feel like, and I find myself getting into that hole. Right, as soon as that negative person starts speaking up, it's like, here we go. I'm in. I got something negative to say.
Misery loves company, right?
Oh,
It's
it
not just a
does. It
Metallica
does.
song.
It does. And I love when somebody says, like, Steve, man, you're such a positive guy. But on the flip side of that, I hate when somebody's like, man, why, you know, why'd you get so upset there? Why'd you get salty there? Why'd you get, and you hear those negative attributes start coming in, and it's like, man, that you're right. That is not how I want my name to, or what I want my name to be associated with, and that's a difficult thing to hear, to feel. But it absolutely goes back to as soon as you can start to find those little glimpses, man, it compounds really quick. And then it works the other way, right? You can bring other people into it and get rid of those negative people in your life and hopefully have some influence there. Well, when did you learn that the writing was going to be a key thing for you? Did it start out as just a journaling thing, or did somebody encourage you into it? Where did the writing come into it?
Masters for me, like when I got my master's, it was forensic science. It was a lot of technical stuff. And
Okay.
then when I got the doctorate, I went into more writing about, strategic security, counterterrorism, all the other stuff. I'm like, hey, you know what? I kind of like this. And then, later on, if anybody Googles my name, the first thing that's probably going to pop up is that I'm a whistleblower.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, you know what? And let me explain to the audience, like, whistleblower, where the hell did that come from? Well,
Yeah. No, you went right where I was hoping you'd go, man. Because it is. I did the same thing. I did the same thing. Is like, hey, who is this guy? Like, I've been following him. Who is it? And boom, there it is.
yeah. So at one time, I actually worked for the White House Security Council. I worked for the Homeland Security, and I was part of this, what they call a human smuggling cell. So our goal was just, in 2012, 2013, a lot of unaccompanied migrant children were coming across the border. The key term is unaccompanied alien children, is the UAC. So a lot of the kids were coming across the border by themselves, tender age kids all the way up to like 17. And when I say tender age, like my kids' age at the time were like 6 and 8. So they were like young kids coming across the border. A smuggler would bring them up, drop them across the border, and then they would get shuffled off into the system. Now, there was hundreds of thousands of these kids over the years coming across. And our goal with the cell was to go after these smuggling organizations and dismantle them. So here's how the process worked. A child comes up to the border. They're either taken into custody by the U.S. Border Patrol or at the port of entry by uniform Customs and Border Protection officer. They get processed, they get handed to ICE. ICE gives them Immigration and Customs Enforcement, transfers them into the custody of Health and Human Services, a non-law enforcement agency, who then gives them over to a sponsor facility, who will then give them over to a sponsor. It's almost like the foster system. You're going to give someone over, they're going to take care of this kid until they go through the immigration process. Mm-hmm. The rules say these sponsors are supposed to be vetted. There's supposed to be criminal history checks done. They're supposed to be like solid, outstanding people. They're going to be taking custody of a young child. The problem was, I'm in the cell. I get a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet's 29,000, has a name of 29,000 sponsors. And they ran them. And what I mean by that is Homeland Security, Immigration Customs Enforcement took the name of the sponsors with their biographical data, the biometrics, not biometrics, because they weren't taken, their biographical data and running them through criminal histories. And 3,400 or 3,600 plus came back to be criminals, including sex offenders. And I said, we released how many of these kids out there? Not just a spreadsheet, but how many of these kids are out there since, this is 2015 when I was there. So you have years of these kids getting out there. I'm like, what are we going to do to get these kids back into a safe haven and then release them into back into the custody of someone who's actually vetted?
Sure.
And it fell on deaf ears, and it kept falling on deaf ears. So then what I did was I legally blew the whistle, and I didn't leak information to the press. I didn't do this, because you hear about a lot of that stuff. So I went to the Office of Special Counsel and I said, hey, look, we're releasing children to criminals. We need to do something about it. And eventually, a couple of years later, they actually did. They started vetting, taking fingerprints, interviewing them, and then later on they would do DNA, rapid DNA. Since then, in the past year, they stopped doing that because of the massive influx of kids coming across. So, it did. But I remember when I blew the whistle, I was like, my career was over. I knew if I blew the whistle, somehow they may be able to find out who I am. And they did eventually. But I remember going home that night and my kids were like 6 and 8. And I was like, how can anyone live with themselves knowing that there was little kids out there right now? And I was the one in control of the database that showed, okay, here's the unaccompanied children. Here's their pictures, because they took pictures of them. And here's who they gets like released to or whatever. And I'm looking at like some of these kids and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's like babies on there. There's 2 or 4 year olds. And I'm like, I did eventually work with Senator Charles Grassley's office, and they found out some of these kids were getting sent to sex traffickers and to labor traffickers. So some of these kids were actually working at farms. I mean, it's a crazy situation.
Sick, yeah.
So and that's one of the things I'm like, okay, you know what? When all these pictures of kids in cages started coming out and all this other stuff, I'm like, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to tell people like exactly how the border works and what my experience has been, and then why I blew the whistle and then what happened afterwards.
Yeah. What was your response from people that knew you? Let's take out, maybe what people that didn't know who you are, just another guy doing the job and didn't like something, unhappy with something. But people that knew you, how was that response, both positive and negative?
I've kept about 80% of my friends. 20% of some of the ones that were in management ghosted me and, talk smack, but I kept about 80%. And they're like, whatever, dude, just don't, don't have it fall back on us. I wouldn't say that's the word for it, but no, it's not really like that. It was like most of the people were solid and spot on and supportive.
Sure. What were the initial stakes in the moment of making a massive decision like that you knew at an ethical and maybe even moral level, this is something I need to go forward with? I know there's people out there listening right now to this that are at maybe not something as on a large scale weighty as that, but are in a dilemma that they're saying, hey, there's going to be fallout. And what was kind of your processing loop there of how this is going to work?
I'd love to say like, hey, my retirement's all planned out. I'm good to go. But at the time I had 15 years in, I was still, years away from being eligible to retire. Mm-hmm. But I knew that I don't know. I just had to make the decision, and I knew that it might all be over, but I knew somehow I would find a way to make it work.
Hmm.
I still have, shit. When I before growing up, I became a professional car cleaner. I know how to clean cars. I could buff a car. I could do this or that. When I got out of the army the first time, I could clean cars. I knew I could do something,
Yeah, sure.
but I
Back to those
wasn't gonna.
options.
But when you're gonna make these decisions, make the decision, but plan your decision. Make the decision. If you have the time, like me, I knew I didn't have the option of blowing, like going out there and leaking. Do the right thing when you're making a decision. Do your research. If you have the time, do the research. This isn't like the decision where you're like, okay, we're going to take that house. They got bad guys in there, whatever. This is the decision that's like, okay, you know what? If I'm going to blow the whistle, how am I going to do this and remain anonymous? And then what am I going to do if they do find out about me?
Hmm.
Now, I did plan on being anonymous, and I'm not going to go into the whole story about how they found it out. You could actually read about it in
There
Unwavering,
you
a
go.
border agent's journey coming
I
out
love it.
in November. But the thing is, I knew that I had to make the decision.
Hmm.
And that's one of the biggest things I write in the books. I'm like, if I had to do it again, I would.
Yeah.
Would I change a few things? Yeah, I probably would. There's not many, and the long story short is like, not many people that work for this cell were a certified fraud examiner. I'm the only one. And when I was doing an anonymous debrief, I mentioned that I was a CFA because I was trying to boost my credibility to show that okay, this data is skewed.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean that's all part of the equation, right? So we operate in a data-driven world that credibility does matter at various levels to be able to, and that goes back to that use discernment whether this is good or bad, and it's all part of the process. But no, to step into something like that is absolutely huge, and then actually to put pen to paper. And what was it like at that? Was that the moment that once it came out, was that the moment that kind of some of all the news outlets and things started to get a hold of your name and you started kind of putting yourself out there more?
Later on, nobody in the news knew who I was, but when everything happened, I was like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna talk about it. So I started doing the news, and I started becoming like mainstream media. I was on Tucker, Hannity, and all the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was like, you know what? I'm starting to become a soundbite. Like I
Mm.
can't, and that's why later on I started doing court TV a lot. Is because court TV I get 25 minutes. I get to talk about current cases, kidnappings, officer
Sure.
involved shootings, and stuff. And I get to actually talk. That is one of the reasons I started doing the podcast. That's the 99% of the reason I started doing the podcast was to talk to people and listen to their stories, but without a political edge to it,
Mm.
without being so driven to just sell a product. And that's what the media is. They're trying to sell a product. And that product is either far left, far right, but they're selling an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And I didn't want an echo chamber. That's what I love about podcasting. And that is the reason I do a podcast, because I want to be able to talk about difficult situations, positive situations as well, and just life, and not have to worry about an echo chamber. I want to be able to talk to a civilian. I want to talk to military. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about anything.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that it's an interesting platform that podcasting has really kind of brought out. And I mean it's free education when it comes down to it. Yeah, sure, you got to vet. There's thousands upon thousands of podcasts out there that have to be vetted and you need to think about the information, but it creates another layer to the information that's getting out there. And the long form stuff I absolutely love, and it's life-giving to me. I say this probably on near every podcast I do, but the moments of just kind of really fleshing out what it means to be in this world and have the human experience, and it really helps me come alive and frame, right? That's what it all comes down. Frame my life and where I'm at, and see how men like yourselves have walked through these difficult things. What have you learned most? Tell us the name of the original podcast, and or the one podcast, and now you have a second one that's just launched, right?
Yeah, what I did was actually combine them again. So I
Oh,
have the
okay.
protect. I was going to start a whole new one, but I'm like, you know
Okay.
what? That's a lot of work. Holy.
Uh,
But I have the Protectors podcast, and I started incorporating different types of conversations. So my big thing now is become the protagonist, become the hero of your life. So I'll have special episodes with people who are becoming the protagonist, who are doing it, and just lessons learned and how to get to there. But it's really just almost exactly like this, just a conversation, and we get to talk. And we get to talk about the transitions. We get to talk about different points of life. Every guest I have on there is different.
Yeah.
So I need to find something in there, and I just key off conversations just like we do here. So
Yeah.
we're basically doing the Protectors podcast with but
Uh,
it's the same type of premise, and it's just you have to learn. That's what I love about podcasting.
Yeah. Well, and I love just hearing people's perspectives when you listen to someone actually interview someone versus be interviewed. It's amazing what is drawn out in the conversation. And I'm sure you find this because many of the folks that have podcasts say similar things is ultimately when you really sit in conversation and you may have a direction you start walking, it kind of opens up into a whole nother layer and a whole nother dimension of places I didn't expect to go. And that's the adrenaline rush of a quiet moment in my office that I look forward to so much, is to say, man, I didn't see that coming, right? The information hit me in a new way. And, talking even today about making decisions and parenting in the spotlight and all of these things, they're just nuggets, right? Because at the end of the day, somebody's probably going to remember 2 or 3 minutes of something that really struck them, and they're going to move on to their next podcast. And that's okay.
Well,
That's,
you know that 1%, and it's actually more than that. It's a selfish reason I started the podcast because I want to talk to these people and I want to learn. I
yeah,
want to learn as much as possible, and I want to have these conversations, and I want to learn. I want to get different perspectives on things. And so I tell people, if you're in a podcast, commit. Get past the 5 episodes and commit. If you don't want to do it after 5 episodes, don't do it. Don't just try to, you know, sometimes I've probably had about 3 or 4 guests. I've had 370 something interviews so far. I had about 3 or 4 guests where it was like almost like pulling teeth,
hmm
but they're not all going to be like that. So if you get into it, think about those ones that you're going to really love and it's going to change your life.
yeah. And Jason, I was thinking, well, early on when I started podcasting, I had a guy reach out to me that I didn't hear from him. I didn't know anything about him, and I was trying to get kind of my feet wet, so to speak. And he's like, kind of, this is what I do. This is the lifestyle I lead. This is my message. And I did an interview, and you know what? At the end of that interview, I was like, cool. That's awesome. I don't know who it'll hit or what it'll strike. And all of a sudden I start getting these messages like, man, thank you for having that guy on. Like, he really, like, can you get me in touch with him? And, I started having some of that feedback, and it's just like, wow, like, people are really thirsting, and they're at different points in their journey, and you never know what might quite hit. But at the end of the day, you bring that positive person on that has drive and is really leaning into to life, and not allowing the just disruptive moments to overtake them. And it's really cool to see or to hear about listeners experiencing that. What's the feedback been like for you?
It's so weird. It's like, because, you talk about putting yourself out there, but I've done some public speaking engagements. And it's so much different than this. I've been on like major TV networks, but I never thought about how many people listen to me or how many people see me. I
Yeah.
never think about it. But once I do, I start getting freaked out, and I'm like, ooh. And then you hear sometimes you get a lot of good feedback, but sometimes you get people like, who the hell are you to talk about this stuff?
Right.
So I try to focus on the positive. And then if there's anything ever negative, I don't respond. I just block. It's not worth it to get,
Uh,
into a fight with some anonymous guy or girl on the internet.
sure. Sitting in their basement just waiting for it, No, I hear you on that one all day long. Well, look, man, lay out for the listeners. So tell me the titles of the 2 books, and the hit me with the podcasts again. And what do you have coming up for the shows and the book release?
Yeah, so I redid my book. I published the book right away in 2019. I really didn't do a lot of planning. I wanted to write it and get it out there. It wasn't really I wasn't proud of it. Like,
Hmm.
after I went back and looked at it, I wanted to put something out there that I'm proud of. So what I did was I redid my book. I call it the Unwavering: A Border Agent's Journey. The definitive edition is coming out in November. Should be probably about November 1st or 2nd, somewhere around that time frame. And then I also have a primer. So people don't know what's going on at the border with the kids. I wrote a book called Out of the Shadows, a government whistleblower's account of how the migrant children crisis became a political firestorm. And that was just like an 80-page primer saying, okay, this is what's happening at the border. This is why it's happening. And this is what you could do to help. And then I'm also got the podcast. I'm still doing a podcast. I have so many awesome authors have been on and people, and I'd love to have you on.
Yeah, man.
Jack Carr's been on like what, 6 times now? Brad
True.
Taylor, Brad Thor, every thriller writer you could possibly imagine, military heroes. Gabby Reese, for all you 1990s people, has been on. She's awesome.
There you
I
go.
had Jesse Graff at one time from American Ninja Warrior. Just a ton of so many different guests, man. And I'm really trying to land John Bernthal. I got to get him
Really?
on, man.
Yeah, man.
I'd
That'd be
love to talk to
awesome.
him.
Sure.
And then, I'm always trying to just, I'm not trying to land the big thing. I'm trying to talk to people that I think are really interesting.
Hmm.
So, I forgot. I'm doing a podcast for Ranger Point Precision about lever action guns and people
Oh,
like that.
man, they're
It's
blowing
called,
up on social media. It's
yeah, they
awesome to
are.
see.
What is
It's
it?
awesome to see.
Yeah, the Ranger Point podcast. I'm hosting that one. So, yeah, man, I'm just, I'm doing what I can. Just having fun. That's the big thing is having fun.
Yeah.
I used to grind, man. I would interview 3 or 4 people a week and I'd be pumping out episodes and pumping out episodes. Now I'm maybe once or twice every 2 weeks I'll have a guest. I have enough guests for like one episode a week. I'm not trying to just do them. And
Sure.
that's what I enjoy about this. I like just, hey, you know what? I want to get a guest. I want to talk to them. I'm not pulling on people that are just here to, you know, sell something. I'm not, not a big
Yeah.
fan of that.
No, and I connect with that a lot. That's really where I've kind of arrived. I was when I got into it, it was like, hey, I'm gonna try and get 2 shows out a month was kind of my original goal, and I was just pulling from everybody I knew and getting good shows out, good response, good feedback, and then kind of really have settled in here, even in the past half a year of just like, man, I really want to target and get that speak to that person that really makes me think and ask bigger questions about where I'm at and what I'm doing and what I'm about and what I hope to be about here in the future and pushing those things out. And if it takes 10 episodes a week or if it takes one a month, I don't really care at this point, right? I'm not, I ain't making money with this thing, that's for sure. But it is really a learning experience for myself, and it's an incredible training that I receive and feedback. So, no, man, that's phenomenal. Well, I
I'd like
got
to
to
have you on
ask
a show soon, man. I
dude, we
gotta
gotta
have you
do
on the
it.
show
We gotta
now.
do it. I've enjoyed following what you're doing, and I'd be honored to be a part of what you're doing and what your audience is about. But I gotta ask you, what has your attention right now in end of 2022? Man, it's weird to say that we're coming down the home stretch, fourth quarter, and what's got your attention? What are you just hanging on, saying I gotta learn more about that? I want to be a part of this. This is going to better my life. It's gonna make me a better father. It's gonna make me better in every aspect of life. Where are you at?
That's the biggest thing is physical. It's all physical with me. Because it drives my mental. When I'm in a good headspace when it comes to like working out and eating
Hmm.
proper fuel, and I like to consider because fuel was my crutch, man. I mean, food was my crutch. I would be like, oh man, and some people like can drink all day long and they get buried in a bottle. When I've done that in the past, but food has always been my crutch. Now I think of it as fuel. But when everything's going good and I'm working, I'm eating good, my mental acuity is through the roof. So a lot of it is just being physical, and that supports everything else. I have to keep learning. I'm always, I watch shows and stuff like that. I watch TV, but I watch a ton of YouTube and listen to a ton of podcasts because I'm always trying to learn and better my craft.
Yeah. Yeah, no, right on, man. That thirst for new information, and I don't mind even information that I didn't know what was important, or that maybe I didn't think I would connect with, or maybe once I listened to it I disagreed with. It's just like, hey, throw as much at me as I can absorb, and then we'll try and make some decisions, and
There's
hopefully
no
create
magic
some
silver bullet.
opportunities.
That's the truth.
You are right there, brother. You are right there. Well, man, awesome. How does everybody connect with you? Find the podcast, connect on the socials with you. Where can they go?
Social media is mostly all Dr. Jason Piccolo on Twitter and Instagram and everything. The podcast is the Protectors Podcast, trademarked one. There's another one out there. It's a long story with those.
Oh, there we go. We'll have to dig on that one.
Oh my gosh, they started a podcast called the Protectors Podcast like 6 months ago, and I'm like, bro, I'm like, you know, I've had this or it's been a year about now. I'm like, I've had this show out for a while. They're like, but it's not the blank 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 Protectors Podcast. I'm like,
Sure.
I'm like, okay.
So-
Yeah, it's a long story right there, man.
Oh man, no doubt, no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, podcasting's an interesting medium right now.
Yeah, if you type in Jason Piccolo, you'll get my website and everything too.
Right on. We'll get everything linked up, and everything will be in the show notes that everybody will know where to find you. Looking forward to the book coming out, man. And I can't commend you enough. I know we don't know each other at a deep level, but just connecting a little bit on social media and then setting this thing up, it's really been a privilege to have you on. I thank you for the courage that you've displayed in doing what you're doing and getting information out there. I'm learning from where you're at and what you're doing. It's motivating to me, and I know it'll be motivating to the audiences out there. So, man, press on even in the dark days, and really get out there and support those kids. Do you have any final thoughts for everybody here before we close out?
Nah, just like and subscribe to the Interrupted Podcast.
Oh, man, thanks.
And review the Interrupted Podcast.
Yeah, how about that? Spoken from a true podcaster right there. So, right on, man. Well, we'll be in touch real soon, and hopefully we can connect for your show. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
So, thanks.